So next up is something slightly different. So we have an executive insights panel now made up of 4 senior industry leaders. So they will each introduce themselves and then we'll go to questions. So each of our panelists today have really different roles and so we'll be able to offer very different perspectives of the current and the future jobs market as well. So I am delighted to be joined by David, Chris, Ben and Paul. So David Ardil, thank you for stepping in so last minute. David actually stepped in for a colleague this morning. David, can we start with you? Could I ask you to introduce yourself, the organisation that you work for as well? That would be fantastic.
Of course, yeah. Thanks so much, Esme. Yeah, so I'm David Ardil. I'm the manager of the Academy Ambassadors Programme. We're part of New Schools Network, which is a Department for Education funded programme. And our kind of objective, if you will, is to identify senior leaders with strategic experience and expertise and to help them find roles as non-executive directors and trustees in the academy sector, so in education, sitting on boards of the trustees to help kind of manage the governance of those of the academies, the academy trusts. So the programme has been around since 2013. New Schools Network has been around a little bit longer than that, and we've had sort of great success in what we do. In that sort of headhunting type space, I guess, in the sense of finding the right people to take on the roles that require people, and certainly the folks that are with us today, I'm absolutely certain will have a lot of those skills that we seek and are able to bring to the boardroom and are able to kind of offer the benefit of the skills and experience in the sector.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. So Ben Farrell, as well as being the head of operational support and stock flow for Waitrose and John Lewis, is actually an OA trustee as well. So Ben, if I could hand over to you to introduce yourself, that'd be fantastic.
Good morning. Thanks very much, Esme. Well, I'm a former soldier. I was in the Irish Guards for 22 years. And in 2011, much to my own surprise, I decided that I would leave the army and look for opportunities outside. I had no plan in particular. I was fortunate, and with a lot of help from a lot of people, to start in the John Lewis partnership, where I started in a role as head of operational risk management, which was all to do with understanding the threats to John Lewis and Waitrose in terms of trading. And I've had numerous different roles within the leadership team of the John Lewis partnership since then. My current responsibilities are centred around the supply chains of both John Lewis and Waitrose, and also keeping the show on the road for the business operationally. And this last year, funnily enough, rather like Patricia said, and it's relevant in terms of skills, I've led our collective response to the pandemic, how we've traded through the pandemic. And I'm a trustee of the Officers Association, which I much enjoy doing as a way that I could give back. Because when I was leaving the army, I came to the Officers Association and I had an interview at the John Lewis partnership already, and by complete chance, one of the OA career advisors had worked in the John Lewis partnership before. They had the reports and accounts, and I read the reports and accounts in the OA offices, went for my interview with the finance director, told her I'd read the reports and accounts, and she said, "What do you think of them?" I said, "Absolutely brilliant." She said, "That's so good. I wrote them and you've got the job." So you can't rely on more than a bit of good fortune. So and I also am chairman of the Invictus Games Foundation Programme Board at the moment as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Next up, Chris, would you be happy to introduce yourself? I'm sure many of you in the audience will recognise Chris Recchia, partner at Deloitte, and champion for veterans, doing a lot of work in the area. So Chris, over to you.
Such a gladiator, eh? Yeah, so thanks for having me today. Chris Recchia. So presently I'm a partner in Deloitte. I have been with the firm for 20 years. Prior to that, was in the army. I joined at 16 as a boy soldier. After a couple of tours, went to Sandhurst and then had a commissioned career for 8 years. So about 12, 13 years in total, before I left in 2001 and joined Arthur Andersen at the time. And for those that know, we then became part of Deloitte in the UK. By day, I am a financial services partner. So I deal with my my clients who sit within that sector and work with all of the large banks, helping them deal with various different things in and around technology, risk, cyber, digitization, all of that sort of stuff, whilst also helping run the relationships with these big organizations. And then, if you like, by night, back in 2012, I set up the Deloitte Military Transition and Talent Programme, the purpose being to help service leavers at the point of their transition. And that continues to grow from strength to strength. Back in 2016, we also launched the Veterans Work brand, which was an initiative to help educate UK PLC as to why it's good to hire veterans into their organisations. And again, that continues with a fifth instalment coming up in May and June this year. So that's a little bit about me. Like Ben, I sit as a trustee as well outside of Deloitte on the charity. I'm a trustee and board member of the Special Boat Service Association down in Poole. Yeah, so that's me.
Excellent, thank you, Chris. And last but by no means least, Paul Miller, could I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you, Esme, and thank you everyone for allowing me to join you today. My name is Paul Miller. I'm managing partner of a private practice, and basically we work in the construction industry. We're professional consultants providing architectural services, surveying, mechanical, electrical, civil, structural engineering, clerk of works, health and safety. Multidisciplinary, pretty much across the whole range of services in the construction industry. We primarily focus on the housing industry. It's probably still around 2/3 of our turnover, and primarily in the public sector. And it's an area that I've always been very passionate about. I've done the majority of my career, which is quite long now, in public sector housing. You tend to get pigeonholed, but I'm not ashamed of that by any means. I'm very proud of it. It's about making a difference to people's lives. It's improving the quality of the built environment and moving people forward in better living standards. So it's great. We've got 6 offices. So you could arguably say we're national. Our furthest north office is Birmingham, and they have the hard work of covering the rest of the piece outside the sort of southeast area that the rest of our offices are focused on. And we employ around 320 people as things stand. We continue to grow. We've been trading for about 80 years now. I hasten to add, I've not been working from all that period. And we're a partnership, so I'm one of 10 owners of the business. And just to sort of try to summarise what we're about as a business, our success is founded on our people, and without our people providing the services to our clients, we have no future. We like to bring people in at all different levels. It's about career development. It's about trying to allow people to attain professional status. It's about continuing with the professional development. The construction industry is very dynamic. It is about adapting. Patricia covered some of that very well indeed just a short while ago, particularly given the current situation in the construction industry, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, with some of the challenges around fire safety, particularly with the Grenville disaster. So it is, albeit challenging, but very enjoyable. I've loved every minute of working in the industry. So I hope that's given you a bit of a profile of me. Thank you.
Fantastic, Paul, and thanks to all of our panelists for the introductions. Exactly what we needed. So just a reminder, use the Q&A, the chat function, or raise your hand to ask your questions. But I will start with some of these questions that we've had submitted in the lead up to the event. So we had quite a few actually around skills translation and the skills valued by employers, obviously, especially within the current market. So from your own perspectives, what are the skills that businesses are lacking at the moment, or the skills that they most need? Ben, could we start with you?
Sure, thank you. Over the last decade since I left the army, I've given it some thought, and I've come to the point of view that a service career as an officer equips you incredibly well in ways that perhaps aren't always obvious to everybody. It's intuitive and obvious that we collectively were trained in leadership in a way that no other sector invests in their leaders. So in a way, that's given. But I thought deeper than that about where the skills are. And the things that have always come to mind for me are the ability and instinct naturally to take an end-to-end perspective. And for those who are in the army, if you think back to Sandhurst when we did, I think it was called Practac, where you were asked to answer questions about the military echelon system, which is in essence was describing a process that stemmed not from your area of responsibility, but deeper within an organization. That equipped you to take a really broad perspective, to join the dots across organizations, which I think is a skill that is really missing in lots of people. People's haven't benefited from the training. They often only think from their siloed point of view. So I think the first thing that you'll be really good at naturally is about taking a broad perspective, ability to join the dots and understand how organizations need to function collectively across the piece. So that is something that I think you can add value instantaneously. I think emotional empathy in terms of understanding the organization and the people within the organization is something that you will find that you're really good at and often is lacking within organizations. I think a progressive and modernizing mindset as well. When I think about leaving the army and joining the John Lewis Partnership, I found there were people who were called experts in change managers. I literally had never heard of this capability before, because the army changes. The army changes today, tomorrow, the next day. If you went, for example, as I do occasionally to the Army Museum, you look at an organization that has adapted and changed to succeed continually. And so it's almost so ingrained in the DNA of the army and the armed forces that we didn't make it a specialist activity. So to be comfortable with change, to embrace change, to be forward thinking about the world is an incredibly powerful skill. I think you would all bring. Taking the initiative and being able to drive that forward is also something that I believe you will find your instinct takes you to straight away. And of course, within all that, whatever sector, whatever role you end in, your ability to solve problems in a way that you've been trained and structured to do is head and shoulders above others. If you think about the things that I still remember well, the mission analysis and all those sorts of questions, no one else is trained in that way. Your ability to identify it, work through it in a systemic and organized fashion to come up with the right answer. Patricia mentioned some of the other things that perhaps you don't even recognize as abilities to work under pressure, find solutions, be comfortable with ambiguity, in fact thrive when the situation becomes more and more difficult. Analytical competence, even the description that Patricia talked of when you're looking at a job description and looking at your own skills. Use all the skills that you've learned through your estimate process, mission analysis, all those sorts of things. They come massively into play. So I could go on. I think there's a raft of skills that are underplayed by people who are in the armed forces when they leave that are so relevant to business. I am convinced to this day, a decade later, having left the Irish Guards, I commanded the Irish Guards between 2008 and 2010. If I took the officers' mess of the Irish Guards, created a business, and we collectively got behind it, it could be massively successful because the innate ability and talent is overflowing.
Thank you, Ben. Paul, how about you and your sector? Are there any particular skills gaps or skills that you particularly value?
It's not so much about the skills gap, it's just about the resources. The construction industry has not done so well over the last few decades, really, in terms of developing people. Our track record has not been so good. There's been a big wake-up call, and I think particularly with some of the most recent challenges, I think people have seen that diluting the service that we previously provided. I mean, a very good example, when I started out as a trainee builder surveyor, every site I walked on, there was a resident clerk of works. Well, I can't remember now the last time I saw a resident clerk of works, someone that was on site all the day, eyes and ears, watching what's going on and keeping an eye on things to make sure the standards are maintained. So I think stepping back from what's lacking, I think it's more about the level of resource that's available. And I think many businesses, ourselves included particularly, it's all about growing our own talent. We've recognised we've got to come back from just stepping in and getting someone that's qualified, that have got all the right experience behind them. It's actually taking it right back to grassroots level and saying we will develop, we will train, we will develop talented people. And obviously the whole industry is very much woken up to that, I believe. And that's really the issue. I hope that's answered the question.
Definitely. That's really interesting. Thank you. So Chris, as a former military officer yourself, now a champion for veterans in industry, what are the employers' perceptions of ex-military personnel? What value do you think they bring to business?
So thanks for the question. I think the first thing to register is that I think there is a journey that we're all on, and we've got to educate ever more industry, and I say that as a collective, agnostic of sector, as to the benefits that veterans can bring, and many people are doing that all of the time, but it can always get better, and I think the more it gets better, the more benefit industry UK PLC has when it comes to accessing the skills of service leavers at the point that they leave. And if you think about it, it's almost criminal if we're not doing that as organisations in industry. When you look at the training that individuals get, be that as a private soldier, infantry soldier, for example, right through to a fast jet pilot or whatever else. The training and extent of training, as we've heard, is second to none, and something that we should be tapping into post-service. Having said that, I think when you do educate organisations and through the work of DRM and all of the organisations that are supportive of this ecosystem, perceptions become very quickly very favourable of service leavers in my experience. So once an organisation understands the value that a service leaver can bring, and they can understand where to home them and where to put them, then you are onto a winner for sure. And I think that's important for the service leaver to understand, because when at the point of leaving, they're going through their transition, I think one of the single biggest factors is for the individual to understand exactly what it is they can bring, the skills that they've got, and the value that will translate into for organizations. And for me, I'm not just talking about the management and leadership type skills that are inherent in service leavers at whatever level that they leave, rank agnostic, because they've got those, and that's brilliant. But if you look at the military today, there are many, many, many examples of where, as a military that is digitizing, automating all of the time, often ahead of industry, there are very, very many examples of where skills are directly translatable, whether you're talking about in the world of cyber, whether you're talking about engineering, whether you're talking about medical, as we've seen through the course of the pandemic, whether you're talking about the construction industry, as Paul's been talking about. I think there's all of those core skills that are directly translatable on top of the management and leadership type skills. Plus, of course, the points that Ben makes around empathy. I think it's second to none. It's not a skill that people would ordinarily think of, but it is there. And then I think of there's many others as well. So it can always get better. But when we educate industry well and organizations understand it, then it becomes very favorable. And I think the proof is in the pudding, in that you look across industry now, and I think there are more and more people that have been able to transition and leave and then have a second career and be very successful. If I look at my own sector, there's many in banking that have done very well and that sit at the top of banking in industry. So always more to do, but we shouldn't be afraid of the skills that we've got and that can be brought.
Thank you, Chris. And David, thinking about those transferable skills, we see a lot of officers actually interested in the education sector. Are there any particular roles that you potentially see officers best suited to? And do you have any advice on best accessing these?
To be honest, Esme, I'll probably turn the question the other way around. I think it's more a case of there's no role that wouldn't suit the officers, the leavers. I think we work with every size of trust across the country. So we work across England. And that trust that can be one school on their own, or it can be up to, I think the biggest trusts are 60 plus schools. So across that size, that range of trust, we find that there's every different skill requirement within there. And the most common ones, I think, strategic leadership, risk management, and kind of those real ability to see a complex problem and assimilate a lot of information across multi-site organizations. That's the obvious key kind of areas that we look for, perhaps for the individuals that would come from OA. I think probably another thing to point out really is we are an education focused search organization, but that doesn't mean that there's any education specific requirements in terms of coming to us for a role. In actual fact, we find very often the people who are most suited to our roles are the people who don't have any pre-existing knowledge or connection to education. That's to say, I'm not suggesting none of your children or relatives should ever have gone through education, of course, but there's no prerequisite for that. There's no kind of assumption that you will know anything about Ofsted or exams or anything like that at all. So we find that coming into our roles, that having that ability to look at cold hard data in some ways, look at a problem, look at a strategic situation, and make strategic decisions that are removed from the context of that specific school or site. They're the individuals invariably who we find are best suited to the roles. And I think from what I understand from my fellow panelists today have spoken about, the skills that would be possessed by the candidates that come through OA would be absolutely suited to what we're looking for, as we found with multiple people in the past through the programme. I think it's worth pointing out as well, it's strategic, not operational. So a couple of the panelists do have those trustee positions at the moment, and will probably echo that fact that very much of what we look to recruit to is not about getting your hands dirty and sort of doing the doing in any of the schools. It is very much having that eyes on, hands off role in the board sense. So we very much kind of reiterate that through our conversations with individuals. And through the way that we work, we very much invite anyone who's interested to express that interest to us, and we then match individuals to a trust based on what they're looking for. It's not a case of fitting a square peg into a round hole at all. We, in some cases, it might be a little bit of a wait to find the right role for the individual. It might be that somebody's looking for a specific kind of trust. It might be special educational needs, might have a passion area, or it might be a trust that's looking to grow. It might be a trust that's looking to consolidate. So we very much do that kind of diagnostic around what the trust is looking for and find the individual to match that role. So we see it's quite a collaborative process, and therefore, probably in a long-winded way of answering your question, really, Esme, I think there isn't a right person or a right kind of profile fit for the kind of roles we seek. Everyone is welcome and applicable to apply, and we kind of work from there in terms of finding the right opportunity, I think.
Excellent. Thank you, David. So we've had many questions, both in the lead up and today already, around the impact of COVID on the jobs market. So I'm wondering if I could go to a couple of our panelists just to share their own and their business insights into the impact of the pandemic on recruitment, maybe what recruitment looks like for you over the next 3, 6, 12 months, whether you're seeing any kind of growth, areas of growth in particular, or any areas which seem to be winding down at the moment. So Chris, could we start with you?
Sure. I think the first thing to register is that obviously it's been an extraordinary period, and it's fair to say, certainly across industry, I think attrition levels have been lower than normal, and people have perhaps sat quietly getting on with their jobs given the circumstances. But there is pent-up demand out there. I think that people will see increased attrition and increased movement over the coming summer months, especially. I think people will have sat tight for the best part of 18 months and will either be ready to move roles, or will be looking for that lifestyle change, perhaps, that's been driven by the whole situation that we've been through. But the net position is that my hypothesis would be increased attrition, increased churn across organisations over the coming months for all of those reasons, which means I think, a huge opportunity for service leavers in this moment, if you're able to do the things that we were talking about, which is understand the value you can bring, translate the skills that you've got into something that an organization understands. And if you can do that, then I think the moment that we're heading towards, let's hope post CV19, or at least the next phase, will create huge opportunity. Notwithstanding that, of course, that churn means that there's more people in the market and there's more competition, and you're competing against people in industry as well. But actually, that's no real difference to normal circumstances. But I do think we'll see an extraordinary level of churn and opportunity as a consequence of coming the other side or into the next phase of this whole thing. So, yeah, I think there's huge opportunity for people.
Brilliant. And Ben, how about you? Is it the same in your sector?
Well, retail's been devastated, so it's going to take a little while to recover. But I suppose the point is about adjusting your perspective, perhaps on what are the growth areas, what are the opportunities in the future. Traditional retail is changing. We're if I took John Lewis as an example, or both John Lewis and Waitrose, during the pandemic, our online sales in John Lewis were 100% of total sales, which outstripped our sales from the previous year. All online, the shops were closed, obviously, in Waitrose that grew to nearly 25% of sales. So the skills that associated with the new world of the digital world are really, really, really relevant. But for now, my candid guidance is retail is really going through the mill, and it's going to take a year or three to get through that. So the job market in retail is probably not as buoyant as it has been in the past.
Thank you. No, that's good to know. So, Paul, we've had a question come in from John in the audience specifically for you. So is there a preference for which project management qualification is preferred in the construction sector? APM, agile, Prince, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is no. Any good employer will see it's more about the core skills. We've covered very well already, covered in Patricia's piece as well. There may be some organisations that have a leaning towards simply because that's the programme they put people on. But from our point of view, certainly not. It's more about those skills, about project management. And it's not just about qualifications, I hasten to add. Obviously, it's not so appropriate to the audience today, but we also work on experience. Well, it is as applicable, sorry. It's not just about qualifications. And sometimes our clients like to see that we have professional status. In fact, we are regulated by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, because primarily that's the largest part of our profession within the organisation. But no, it's a simple answer. There is no preference as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. So we have a question from an anonymous attendee. So I'm leaving as a junior officer, so I don't feel like I have the same experience in strategic planning, project management, as some of the more senior officers leaving. Where do you see the opportunities for the more junior officers in civilian sectors? Chris, can I put you on the spot with your military background?
It's a really interesting one. I personally, when people leave, depending on time served, they bring a whole range of different types of skills and experience. But I often think that the core competency that people attain by becoming an officer and serving as an officer, whether it's for 3 years, 9 years, 22 years, whatever it is, actually those core skills, those core values actually often remain the same. It's just the experience and time served that brings different perspectives and different knowledge and insight. So I wouldn't underestimate one's ability to identify an organization, identify a role and get a job, even if you've only served 3 years or 5 years as a junior officer. I don't think all organisations look for the 20 years of experience and everything else. That's not the case. I think they will have roles that they need to fill, and they'll look for the right people to fill them. And often that is a very experienced person. Often it's not. And so I think there's a spectrum of opportunity there for everybody. As a junior officer leaving the armed forces, I think you've got to play to your strengths. And again, I go back to the point around understanding what it is you've done, what were those things, how do you translate them, and how do you create value for an organization? And often it's the little things that you perhaps are, you think are smaller in the context of your own career, but are actually quite significant for an organization. So for example, running the officer's mess X, Y, or Z and the budget attached to it might feel like a small task for the junior officer, but actually in isolation for an organization, you can use it as an example to demonstrate many different core competencies that organizations are looking for, management, budget control, projects start to finish, on time, on cost, on quality, all of those little things. So you've really got to understand what you've done and how you translate it. I can't emphasize that enough. When people get that right and they build the right rapport with the people that they're talking to, they tend to sell themselves.
Fantastic. I think that's a really positive point to end on there. So I'm very conscious of time. So we're already at time. That's been half an hour just over already. It's been absolutely fantastic. So just before we close this session, I wonder whether I could go to each panelist just for their final thoughts, words of advice, or recommended reading material just before we close for our break, if everyone's happy. Paul, could we start with you?
I think the emphasis for us really as an industry is that whole piece around talent, growing talent, and it's about those core skills is always at the foremost of our minds. It's not about experience, qualifications, entry points, minimum requirements. It's about those people coming in with the right mindset, and some of the points Chris has just covered, I just thought were fantastic. That really encapsulates what we, certainly as us as a business, but the industry as a whole needs to focus mostly on. So, yeah, we're very buoyant about the opportunities going forward as an industry. Strong pipeline. Construction industry does have a bit of a reputation in the past for famine and feast, but what I do know is that the government see it as central to the whole recovery of the economy each and every time there's a recession, actually. And as a business, the only time we ever suffered was the last one on time of austerity, the banking crisis, which I think pretty much affected every single business. But other than that, actually, in previous recessions, we've done well as a profession. So, yeah, it's just that whole piece around making sure that we have stability as an organisation, therefore trying to grow that talent.
Thanks, Paul. David, should we go to you?
Yeah, I'd just say if there's anyone who's interested in finding out more, please have a look at our website, academyambassadors.org. And it's very much a case of let's have a discussion around what it is you're hoping to achieve. And I think this, as I mentioned earlier, there's so many different roles that we can help find, and we work closely with some partner organisations too for roles. I think in answer to the question that came up around that level of strategic knowledge and experience, it isn't necessary to always have that in the roles that we find, and we work closely with an organisation called Inspiring Governance too. So we're really committed to kind of really helping improve education governance as a whole, and that's kind of we're committed to that as our objective, and we're open to have conversations with anyone who wants to offer their time and experience in these voluntary roles that we're able to recruit to. And as such, we would just want to have those conversations and direct people accordingly in relation to their own skills, knowledge, and experience.
Thanks, David. Closing thoughts from you, Chris.
Yeah, listen, I think it can be a difficult time when people leave the armed forces. First thing is, I wouldn't leave it right till the end. Start thinking about it, well in advance and plan. You're good at planning, so make sure you use that skill. And then, don't undersell yourself. Be confident about what you can bring to organisations. There are so many things that you have got that organisations need that you can bring. So be confident. Allied to that, though, demonstrate that that layer of humility in order to create real connection with the people that you meet in industry. I think if you can do that, then you'll be more successful. There's many things that you will have done that they have not done, and I think if you can be and show humility through the process, I think that's always a huge strength and draws people towards you. And finally, just remember, positive action equals positive reaction. So be positive.
Thank you, Chris. And last but by no means least, Ben.
Thank you very much. I would encourage you to be bold. Be as bold as you dare. You have extraordinary abilities that progressively you'll be able to translate successfully, and shoot for the stars. And all of us have applied for jobs we haven't been successful in getting. There's no shame in that. It's all about learning, and I think you will surprise yourself by how successful you can become. And I wouldn't feel in any way encumbered, apologetic, or in any sense less than fully confident about your ability to transition to a new world and have a really effective career. It's totally within your grasp. And I think if you looked around at your peers and colleagues, perhaps many have left already, and you see what they're all doing, you can recognize how almost everyone successfully makes a transition. So I would really think my biggest message in hindsight is be as bold as you dare. There's no formula for that. There's no process to follow. There's no APC Glasgow guidelines. Get busy, being daring, contacting people, growing your network. People will be kind, but you need to be busy to do it. And I think it's there within everyone's grasp. And of course, the OA is here to help everybody to do that.
Thanks, Ben. Some fantastic words to finish on there. So just to say thank you all again. It's been an absolutely fantastic panel, which I've had the pleasure of hosting. It's really, really been enjoyable. So thank you.